Good morning. Today we're going to look at one of the etudes for the 2012 TMEA Allstate, Texas Allstate or All-Region Tryouts. We're going to look at the one TMEA calls Etude Number 1. It's in the Rose Studies as edited by David Hite. It's number 35 of the collection of 40 that is in here. And what I'm going to do is, well, actually we should talk about this book a little bit. If you don't have this book, if you're working from some copy that your band director or private teacher gave you, I recommend you get this book. I'm going to tell you a little secret here, just between you and me. All of the clarinet etudes for the Allstate tryouts and region tryouts, be it bass clarinet, alto clarinet, E-flat clarinet, or soprano clarinet, they're all picked from this book every year. And if you can get this book in the off season, you can work on some of the etudes, and maybe you'll wind up practicing one of the ones that comes up again in the next year. So, but this is the book that they all come from. That's just between you and me. Don't tell everybody, okay? It's just you and me, okay? If you do get this book, you should use it like this. It's not bound very well. It's just stapled, and mine's coming apart. What you want to do is make a copy of the etude you're working on and work from the copy, put the book away, mark up your copy. That way your book stays fresh, and if you need to make a fresh copy of it, you can go do that. But work from a piece of paper so that you can pencil on it and erase on it and do whatever you need to do with it. So anyway, we're going to look at the one called number 35. And if you haven't seen this before, it might be a little intimidating for some. And I'm primarily talking to those of you out there who may not have access to a private teacher or don't have easy access to a private teacher. Maybe you're out there somewhere in a community that doesn't have a lot of private teachers around, and you just need some help with it. Maybe you've been to a clinic where someone played through them a couple of times for you. Maybe you've seen, maybe by the time you see this video, there will be some other videos of people playing it on YouTube or some internet video site where you can see people playing them. But what I want to do is talk through this as much as anything and explain a lot of the things that are in this etude number 35, and we'll kind of demystify it and make it a little easier for you to work it out, whether you have a private teacher or whether you don't. So we're going to take a look at it here, and let's start with the very basics. So let's look at our key signature. I'm assuming you got your copy in front of you. I'm assuming you got a pencil, you got your horn. You can noodle along with me here in a couple of places. We'll do some things together. And you can have a metronome with you if you want. Anyway, well, let's look at basic things. First of all, the key signature, 1 sharp, right? It's in the key of G. Not a big deal there. It's not like it's got a whole bunch of flats or sharps in it, so that's not particularly hard. And the key doesn't really change, or at least the key signature doesn't change. If you know music theory and you know how keys work in music, you can look at this and somebody down in the middle looking at it will see that the composer does in fact flirt with changing keys. He adds a lot of accidentals. He kind of goes in the direction of D major a little bit, but he comes back to G. He always does. And so he's never out of the key of G for very long. So key of G is what we're working on here, and that's not a hard key for us on clarinet, and you've probably been working in 1 sharp a good bit, so no big deal there. Our time signature, 4/4 time, probably doesn't get much easier than that, does it? So no real problem there. But the first thing you look at, maybe is you look at these first 6 notes, or maybe you look at the whole page and you see all these black notes, and you think, oh my gosh, things look black here. I'm really going to have to learn a lot of technical things. And yeah, you do. You're going to have to practice this. But what I want to get across to you is it's not nearly as hard as it looks. It's hard enough. You're going to have to work on it. But it's certainly not unplayable, and it's in the reach of probably most of you who are seeing this video. So let's look at the first measure, or even the first group of notes. The first thing you start with, you see these 6/16 notes here. We call that a sextuplet, or some will call it a sextillet, same thing. But basically we got 6 notes in a beat. If you've done a lot in 6/8 time or 9/8 time or something like that, you've probably seen this before. But here we have it in 4/4 time. We're going to have to fit 6 notes in one beat. Now we don't try to do this right out of the box. We slow it down. And this is where you want to take your metronome. And I don't know what kind of metronome you have. You may, if you've got one of these little bitty ones that's just good for setting a beat, you probably want to get a metronome that you can hear while you're playing. Hear easily while you're playing. You want it to be at least that loud. And if I was going to work on this opening little rhythm here, I might set my metronome at 88. And you can set it whatever is comfortable for you. And that tempo, that's actually an 8th note. Okay, that's how slow I'm going here. This is what you want to do. You want to set your metronome to be beating an 8th note for you. This is the first group of 6 notes. And if you look at it, you can play those actually 7 notes. You can play those 7 notes with 2 fingers. And I tell my students, whenever you practice something technical, some fragment like this, always end on a strong beat, end on a down beat, have a down beat that you're shooting for. That just makes it easier when working with a metronome or working on something rhythmically. That's what you want to do, okay? And the whole measure plus the note would sound like. That's our first measure right there. So you might be capable of doing it faster than that. And if you can, that's fine. That's fine. But do what's comfortable. Do what's comfortable. And you know, you can take that and apply that. I'm going to speed it up a couple of notches. I'm going to put it on, what is that, 96. So this is 96. And I'm going to do, that was the first one. I'm going to do the second one. This is measure 3. Measure 3. I'm just working on the measures with the sextuplets in. And there's one in measure 5. And you can apply that all the way down through the piece. You see that sextuplet comes up a lot. Once you get the hang of it though, it's not a hard thing. It really isn't. In most cases the notes are all right side by side. You only need to move a couple of fingers for each one. The important thing is to just get it even and clean, and you do that by practicing it slow. Practicing it slow with the metronome. And as you get comfortable with it, you can always speed it up. We're going to go up to, this is 8th note, what is that, 116. And that's the first 2 measures at 8th note equals 116. Okay, so we've talked about the sextuplets. Let's talk about some other things here. Just looking at the first 2 measures. You got some tonguing and slurring here, right? It's very important that we get the right notes, we get the right rhythm. A lot of people, and maybe some teachers, will tell you don't worry about the articulation right away. I really disagree with that. I think you want to play the articulation and learn the articulation right along with the notes and the rhythm. Otherwise, you just got to come back and unlearn whatever it is you were doing before. But don't start to learn these things by slurring everything. Play it slow that you can get everything correct. The notes, the rhythm, and the articulation. Just take it slow. There's no hurry. Get comfortable with the articulation at the same time you're getting comfortable with the notes and the rhythm. Okay, in these first 2 measures, we've got some tongued staccato 8th notes and some tongued staccato 16ths. At the tempo we're going this slow, it's not going to sound real staccato unless I do a true staccato on the clarinet. And I'm not going to turn this into a clinic on staccato, but in a nutshell, when we play staccato on the clarinet, unless we're going very, very fast, When we play staccato on the clarinet, we stop the reed with the tongue. Now I know there's maybe some band directors who see this and you tell band director you stop the reed with the tongue. The band directors, I mean, they'll break out in hives when you hear this. But the reality is that's what we have to do. That's what we do. And the trick is to do it without stopping your air. The air keeps going. There's probably some videos you can find out on YouTube or out on the web that'll help you understand this kind of tonguing. But just to show you what it sounds like with that kind of staccato, I'll do the first two measures more in tempo. But hear how clean and clipped the staccato is. If I don't do that, I lose the staccato effect and it's more run together. Now at some point you get going where you're going so fast anyway, it's going to sound short because you're going so fast. But the marking on this etude for the tryout, quarter note equals 100, 92 to 100, at that tempo there's still room to make it sound kind of staccato, to get the tongue gently back to the reed and make it happen. Okay, so to play this staccato, there's a rule of thumb here. If you look in the second measure, you start off with two notes slurred, and this comes up a lot. Whenever you got a passage of slurred notes and staccato notes, you always make the last slurred note short. You end that note as if it were staccato. So I would play the first three notes of the second measure. The tongue is coming back to the reed. You want that to happen. And that happens throughout this etude. The last note of a slur is almost always staccato. Okay? So that whole second measure. And you see this a lot in here too. Notice the quarter note on count 3 has a rest after it on count 4. Maybe your band director has told you, or maybe you've had a private teacher tell you that a quarter note with a rest after it is longer than a quarter note or a note with a note after it. In other words, we want to make sure that we hold that quarter note all the way up until that rest begins. In this case, the rest begins on count 4. And technically, count 3 does not end until count 4 begins. So to give that note its full value, we've got to hold it clear up until count 4. And you need to do that if you want to do well in these tryouts. This is something that the judge will bust you on. If you don't, it's an easy thing for them to pick up that you're not doing, and it comes up a lot in here. Look at all the quarter note rests you got. And the composer or the editor, I don't know who put in the dash over that note, over that quarter note, but that's telling you to make sure that note has its full value. Nice, big, fat, full value quarter note. So the first two bars again. Right off on 4. And even if you're slowing it down, if you're, drop this back down to a more moderate eighth note tempo, which is about, what, 108? So this is eighth note 108, second measure. You still practice that full quarter note. If I'm beating an eighth note, the quarter note's going to get 2 beats, right? It has 2 eighth notes in it. So. And you want to hold it right up until that rest begins. Okay? Got to make that happen. Okay. Well, that's the first two measures. Take advantage of that little crescendo you've got in measure 2 to let you go up there and maybe give you a better chance of making that D come out nice with a good tone. You also want to take your tuner and be checking your pitch on these high notes. Depending on how you're set up, you may want to go sharp on them. Some people might go flat if they're not quite ready to play up there yet. But always be aware that your pitch may not be as good as you think it is. And even if you don't notice it, the judge will. And that'll be something else. So you want to check your pitch as you work on these things. So that's the first two measures. And notice the second two measures, measure 3 and 4, the rhythm is exactly the same. And it's the only difference is the chord that we're playing on is a little different. But here's measure 3 and 4. squeak a lot today. But it's the same principle. Everything applies. And what I want to get across here is it's not as hard as you think, because look, measures 1 and 2 are the same essentially as 3 and 4. Just the notes are a little different. Nothing weird rhythmically going on. The articulation pattern's the same. The rhythmic pattern's the same. Just the notes vary a little bit. Okay? Well, let's go on. I'm going to go on here starting in measure 5, and I'm going to keep an 8th note beat. And if you want to try and play along, you can. But I'm not going to go very far. I'm just going to go 4 measures or so. So a lot of what we've talked about still applies here, measures 5, 6, 7, and 8. But let's talk about some other things. Look at measure 5, the very last note in the bar, this low G way down here, and it's got a little accent on it. We're also playing here at forte, right? We were MF at the beginning, now we're forte. You can kind of take that with a grain of salt, because it's going to, and by that I mean don't overdo it, because you're playing higher. You see that measure 5 is higher than measure 1 was? So it's going to sound a little louder anyway. That's just the nature of our clarinet. But what we do want to make sure of is when we go down to that low G, we have a nice healthy sound down low at the bottom of our instrument there. You want a good sound down there. That might be something that can separate you from the other players in the room and maybe get you a better chair or a higher position than you would get otherwise. This etude has a lot of finger wiggling in it, a lot of technique, but in the end these tryouts often come down to tone. Who sounds the best? And in case of a tie, tone wins. Tone wins. It's like the ace of spades, it's like the automatic win, it's like the thermonuclear thing. It just wins. Tone wins. So you want a good sound on these longer notes. Same thing in measure 6. So here's measure 5 and 6. And I should point out too, at this tempo, I'm not really worried about playing them real short. You know, I mean I could, but mostly I just want to get clean, precise, get my fingers in the right place, and get a good tone, okay? And we'll worry about the staccato later. I just want it to sound good, okay? So let's look at measure 7 here. This is measure 7. And again, we end on a strong beat, right? We end on a strong beat in the next measure. Coming up, we have an arpeggio on the D chord, D, F sharp, and A, the first 2 counts of measure 7. And it ends on a C, which kind of makes it into a 7th chord, but that's okay. Don't worry about that now unless you're in theory. But that's what's going on here, and that's what you want to practice. Let's look at these dotted rhythms. Dotted 16th, 32nd note. Ooh, that looks so hard, but it's not really. And what you want to think is that the dotted note is 3 times as long as the short note, as the 32nd note. It's 3 to 1, 3 to 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You can think of it like that. Da, 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 da. It's the old dotted 8/16 thing, if you've worked with those before. Or a dotted quarter 8th note thing. It's the same portion. And we get this a lot in music, this 3 to 1 thing. Do be careful as you practice this. I find a lot of students get all tangled up in the articulation here and do weird things for some reason. But the second half of this measure 7 is just... Look at the articulation pattern. T, a T, a T, a T, a T. Okay? So don't let, be picky with yourself. Make sure you're doing that right. Okay? And then measure 8. Again, we got that full quarter note we want to do. A little bit different pattern here. We haven't had this pattern before on count 1 and 2. You want to really make sure your fingers seal those holes, otherwise you're going to chirp or it'll hesitate to speak on you. And it may not come out clean, but take advantage of that crescendo that you got there in measure 8 as you go up for that high note, and that'll help. And then we continue on, measure 9, more of the same. Nothing really we haven't had here already. This is measure 9. Some different things here. Let's look at measure 11. We've got a little stair step thing at the end of measure 11, a little passage in thirds. We're going to see this more in a little bit here, but watch out for your articulation there. I have students who get kind of tangled up in that. But look at measure 12. Look at the articulation marks here. Dots under a slur. What's up with that? What's this guy doing here? I mean, isn't that contradictory? Slur, we don't tongue at all, but with dots, we tongue real short. What's he trying to tell us here? Well, usually we interpret this as little tongue as possible. We want these notes tongued, but almost connected. Now, at tempo, when you get this up to full speed, they're going to come out sounding kind of regular tongued. If you do it right. They won't sound staccato, but they'll just sound normal tongued. And that's what you should shoot for. But when you're practicing it slow, go for a gentle tongue without a lot of separation. That's what we're trying for. The slur tells us don't separate it, but the dot tells us to give it a tongue. Okay? So, at a slow tempo, this is measure 11. And again, make sure this last quarter note has a dot on it. He could have put a dash there, but make sure that quarter note again gets its full value. I kind of cheated on it a little bit. Okay? So let's go on. This is measure 13. Again, our sextuplet. We've seen this before. Missed the turn, didn't I? Well, let's talk about the turn. This is the big thing here in these two measures. Look at measure 14. You've got this sideways kind of symbol here. This is called a turn. This is an ornament. A trill is another kind of ornament. A grace note is an ornament. And there's other kinds of ornaments that we use from time to time in music. We used to use these things a lot more than we do today, but 200-300 years ago you would see these a lot more often. And the turn, in this case, represents 4 notes that are not printed on your page. Okay? The turn occurs, look at measure 14, it occurs in between that A and the C sharp. In between that A and C sharp, you've got to get in 4 notes. And here's the notes. You're going to do a B, A, a G sharp. That's what the sharp sign under the turn is for, to make it a G sharp. And then another A. And then you play the 8th note C sharp that's printed there. So it's going to very slow. It's going to sound like this. If I play from the A to the C sharp and put the turn in between. That's what we want to hear, of course, a lot faster than that. And we do this on the clarinet. The B natural, we would normally finger this long fingering, right, where we cross the break. But at the tempo we're going to be going here, that's not practical. So what we do is we use an alternate fingering for the B natural. And the alternate fingering is we use the A key and we use the top side key here with our right index finger. And I'm really exaggerating my movements so you can see them. Ideally, when you do this for real, you want your movements to be very small, so you can be clean and quick with it. Okay, so I'm just trying to exaggerate so you can see it. And if you look 2 measures later, in measure 16, you have the turn again, the same notes. The only difference is this time when you come out of the turn, instead of a C sharp, you come out onto a D. So it sounds like this. That's the difference. Otherwise, it's the same thing. And again, you practice it very slow. Practice it very slow and get used to it. That's what you're shooting for. So let's we'll put these 4 measures in context. This is measure 13, still slow. That's how it might sound at a slow tempo. Again, beating the 8th note. That's partly how you should practice it. Once you get comfortable with the turn itself, put it in the context of the music and play this section slowly. Okay, and then as you speed it up, as you get closer to performance tempo, it comes out like that, hopefully. And I don't usually do it that good. But watch this. You'll notice I'm doing a couple of things. In measure 14, my index finger starts going for that key real early. I sneak up there to get to it. You don't wait till the last minute. I mean, this index finger isn't doing anything coming into that note. I mean, the last time this index finger was used was on count 3 of the previous measure. And here I am, I'm getting ready for this thing between count 1 and 2 in the next measure. And another trick you can do is, since I'm coming out of the turn onto a C sharp, you see the C sharp there? Keep your pinky finger on or near that C sharp key. And that will help your other 3 fingers come back to the ring keys after you've done that side B natural. See, I'm pressing this down. Actually, I'm not really pressing it down. Now I think about it, I'm touching it though. I'm touching this C sharp key, and that keeps me in contact with the bottom part of the horn, so that these guys have a chance to get back to the rings. So just watch this hand as we do this. But sometimes my finger will get a good head start to go for that side key. Okay? So those are the turn measures. You just practice them slow, like everything else. Let's look at measure 17 now. We got a big run coming down here. If that looks hard, it shouldn't, because that is a D scale. If you're practicing your scales, you know your scales, that's a D scale coming down until you get to that D sharp at the very end of the measure. But we've got F sharp back there in the key signature, and he's added a C sharp here on the page, and the F sharp and the C sharp make it a D scale. That's all it is. So we continue on, and again, practice it slow. And there's no crescendo crescendo in that measure with the eighth notes in measure 18, but it's okay if you put a little one in there to help you go for that high E. It's perfectly fine to do that. Also, look at this breath mark here at the end of measure 18. I don't know if you really need to breathe there. Maybe the composer just wants, or the editor just wants you to separate that high E from the throat A. I'm not sure what's going on there. We don't need a breath there. You can take one. It's okay. It's not musically a bad thing if you do. But you don't necessarily need one there. And if you don't take a breath, I don't think a judge would fault you for it. That's kind of what we're shooting for, okay? Again, the 16ths in measure 19, you're going to practice them slow. That's what you want them to sound like, okay? Don't sound like that, you're probably missing a note. Okay, let's look at measure 20. Measure 20, and this might be something that gives some students more trouble than anything else, just as one measure goes. This is what we call a scale in thirds, and I'm going to start with the second note in measure 20. That's a scale in thirds. In this case, it's a D scale in thirds. If you've already learned your major scales, maybe you have a private teacher and they're working with you, maybe you've started doing scales in thirds. This is a scale in thirds. If you're a college freshman clarinet major, you're doing this a lot already, probably. But might be that you've never really seen this before. We had a little fragment of this. You remember back up there in measure 11, the end of measure 11, the last 6 notes or so. It's the same as what we've got here in measure 20. Now you do want to watch out for your fingerings here. We're going up into the Altissimo. The Altissimo register on clarinet are those notes above the high C, above this note. That's the highest note in what we call the clarion register. We go above that, we get it where we pick up this first finger and we get up there. We get up into the Altissimo. And most of the notes up there in the Altissimo, we're going to have this pinky down. Some will call this the resonator key or the pinky key or whatever you want to call it, but we keep this down most of the time. We might not put it down if we find that we're really sharp. By releasing it, we'll lower the pitch on whatever note we're working on. But what I want to get across to you here is that the C sharp you see in this scale in thirds here, no pinky key. That's the first note. The C sharp is the first note of the Altissimo register as you go up. We don't use the resonator. But then once we go to the D and the E, we do. We have to have that down. We need that. Now you might get away with the last C sharp of leaving that pinky down. And if it makes it easier to go D, C sharp, E, and leave the pinky down, might be okay. But just listen to it. The notes are going to go by so fast it may not be noticeable. The important thing is that you play it clean. It's got to be clean. And if it helps you play it cleaner, you can maybe for that one note leave that resonator down. I'll leave that up to you. I left it down and the C sharp came out kind of high. But in tempo, another way to practice this kind of thing, and this I'm going to give you a little practice technique here. Maybe you've seen this before, but this is something you can use a lot. Anytime you've got a bunch of notes in a run or the scale in thirds where the rhythm stays the same, you can do what I'm about to show you. You can do this in scale type things, in chord type things. As long as the rhythm stays the same, this is a valid practice technique. And I'm going to do measure 20 here, the 16th notes in measure 20. and I'm going to do the long, short, short, long thing. And what we do is we play whatever it is we're working on, we play it long, short, long, short, long, short, long, like this. And I'm practicing every other note fast. In this case, I was practicing the even numbered notes fast. And I do that a while. I do that a few times. 5 or 6, 7, 8, 20, 30 times. And then I go back and I reverse it. And I play short, long, short, long, short, long. I do this. Now I practice the odd number notes quickly. And you do that a few times. And it gives you a chance to play these things cleanly and accurately with the proper articulation. And you do them separate like that, short, long, and long, short. And then when you go to put it all together in tempo or in rhythm, you have a better chance of getting it right. And that's what you're shooting for, okay? So that's a good practice technique for this kind of thing. And you can use that a lot, long, short, short, long. Okay, so measure 21, we've got our D scale again. Notice measure 21 is just like measure 17. Okay, right? And then measure 22 is just like measure 18. But now, something different happens, doesn't it? Yeah. First of all, I want you to do this. Take your pencil and cross out that breath mark at the end of measure 22. You're not going to breathe there. That breath mark is a no-no. I don't know why that's there. That is a huge no-no. I have a rule, and that is never breathe before anything hard. When you breathe, you stop your air. And on clarinet, and actually wind instruments in general, air is your friend. Air is your friend. And you break the airstream, you know, it's like going into battle with a gun that's not loaded. You got to have your air going. So what you want to do here, you want to achieve that high F. Don't break the airstream. Don't break the airstream. And you can even crescendo into it if it helps you make that note come out. Do check your fingerings. I'm going to assume you know, well, we know how to do E like this, and for the F we just add this little G sharp key, and that gives us the F, okay? That'll be fine for this. It should be a fine, okay fingering for this situation. There's different ways to finger these high notes, but that's the standard fingering, and it should work okay here. So what else about this? Notice it is toned. Ooh, yeah, it is toned. We should talk about this. This is, by the way, this is the highest we get in this piece, this high F, and this is as high as we have to tongue in here too. Let's talk about tonguing up high here for just a minute. When we tongue on the clarinet, most of the time we're going ta 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 or tu 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 tu. I tend to think the ooh sound more than anything else, but a lot of people like to think ta, which is fine. But when we leave the staff, about the time we're going up the scale and about the time we leave the staff, and if we're tonguing this measure 22 here, about the time I get to that G, I'm going to let my tongue change from an ooh or an ah sound. I'm going to let it change to an E. So instead of ta 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 or tu tu tu, I'm going to be going t t t t t. So my last three notes and that high F are going to be done with a T sound, or with a T syllable on my tongue. And the reason is when we use an E sound, we're using less tongue. We're using less tongue. And it doesn't take much tongue to stop the reed when we're playing up high. And the other side of the coin is that if we get a whole lot of tongue on the reed and then we take the tongue off, that makes it a little harder for the reed to restart. And when we're playing up high, the reed needs all the help it can get. If we've got a lot of tongue all over the reed, it's not going to perform well for us. So we try to help the reed. A lot of people don't realize this, but that reed vibrates at different speeds depending on what notes you're playing. The tip of the reed vibrates very fast for high notes and vibrates slower for low notes. And when it's vibrating fast, it takes very little to stop it. But again, above all, do not stop your air. Think of this whole thing as a long tone. And if you want to, if you're having trouble just getting that E and that F to come out, go ahead and practice a slur just to get used to playing up there. If it helps, it may not help you, but if it helps, try that. We're working with skips here going up. That's not the best situation. Might be better to just work on a scale. We're going for a high F. Maybe just take your F scale up your octave. And just, reed's giving out on me here. Just work on it slurred and just try and get up there clean. And the idea is keep your air going. Keep your air going. Don't let anything move here. Don't bite more. You can also do this if you're having trouble getting up there. Maybe push with your thumb. Push the horn just ever so slightly against your mouth. Sometimes that helps. Just kind of push a little bit more into your mouth. But it just depends on what works for you. And then maybe add a tone to it. And then come back to the exercise, or come back to the etude like it's written. And it might still wants to come out with an undertone. I need a slightly stiffer reed here, but I'm not going to bother changing it right now. But that's how we want to get that high F to come out. Above all, don't breathe there, okay? The judge shouldn't fault you for that. Musically, that breath is just not good. It's kind of an apex of a phrase, it's a peak, it's an important point, and we don't want to breathe right before that. A singer would never breathe there. It just wouldn't be done. So let's see, if I go at measure, well, let's take a big chunk here. I'm going to try measure 17. The high D in measure 24. That's kind of what you're shooting for. That's what you're shooting for. Ideally, you should be able to play that in one breath. You get this up to tempo. You ever think about this? The faster you go with something, the quicker you get to the next breathing spot. You ever think about that? Now, at a slow tempo, we're learning it, we're doing things, you're just going to breathe when you have to. Just breathe when you have to. That's all you can do. But as you start working on this, if you get this up to tempo, you can make it from the rest in measure 16 to the rest in measure 24. Now, the good news is this etude doesn't really present that many breathing problems. Some of them do. This one does not. And the reality is, if you've never been to one of these region tryouts before, you will not have to play this etude all at once. You won't do that. Depending on however many clarinetists there are at your region or district when you go to it, there might be 20, 40, or 60 of you in a room there. And the judges aren't going to want to hear everybody play all of this. So they'll pick a section 8, 12, 16 measures and have you play it. And it might be something that you can manage in one breath quite nicely. Might not be that breathing is an issue. But that's how it'll work. And they may have everybody play that excerpt, and then they may pick another excerpt, or they may pick from one of the other etudes. You know, there's 2 other etudes besides this one. There's number 29 from the group of 40, and there's also number 6 from the group of 32 row studies. You need to work those up as well. But today we're just talking about number 35. But the judges will skip around and pick different excerpts and have everybody play them. And then sometimes if they're trying to pick, say, a first chair for the region band and they're having trouble, they might have some people play part of it just a small group of people play it. Or maybe down at the bottom of the section, they're trying to decide who makes it and who doesn't, and they got some people real close, and they might have some playoffs down there. It just depends on what they do. But be prepared for it to go on for a long time. One year I was judging region tryouts, and for some reason they did it on a weekday, on a Thursday, which means we didn't get to start until late afternoon. And we started those clarinet players, and we did not finish them till 1 a.m. And it was a school night, and oh man, people were mad. I was exhausted. But just be prepared. Bring a book to read, bring homework, bring something to study. But that's the hardest thing about being a clarinet player in these region tryouts. They can seem to go on forever, okay? Unlike oboes or instruments where there's just a few people and they're done like that and they're ready to go for pizza or whatever. And then they got to sit around and wait on the clarinet and the flute players because there's so many. But anyway, that's partly how region works. Okay, so we've talked through this down to about measure 25. Let's look at 25. The mood of the etude changes here. Okay, we've been upbeat, we've been very G major-ish, we've been happy and all this. But now we get a little more lyrical, and the word dolce appears in your music. And if you know you're Italian, that means sweetly. That's another great thing about this yellow book. In the back, if you have the book, if you've ever been back in the back, there's a glossary that has every word in it that is used in the etudes. It's defined back there. So that's a really great thing about Mr. Hite's book. I wish other books did that. But if you see a word in here, you're not sure what it means, just you can look it up in the back of the yellow book. Anyway, this is measure 25, and I'm going to play the first four measures here kind of under tempo, slow tempo. I'm beating the eighth note again. That's what we're shooting for, okay? So let's talk about this a little bit. Notice these four measures, they're in two pairs. Rhythmically, they're identical. They're identical. You learn the rhythm in one pair, you've learned it in the other pair, okay? The even number measures here, measures 26 and 28 are chords spelled out coming down. You probably have to practice these. Measure 26 is an F7 chord. F-A-C, E flat. Measure 28. Oh, what is that? That is some kind of diminished, half diminished seventh perhaps. It could be interpreted a couple of different ways. But you're just going to have to practice it and get it up to tempo. Doesn't have any dots on it, right? The staccatos are gone, but at tempo they're still going to sound kind of short. But again, when you go down to those low notes, we want a good, healthy sounding low note. We should talk about this too. Notice our dynamic here at 25 is mezzo piano. Is that the softest we've been thus far? I think that's the softest we've been in this piece. And let's just take a quick look here. The softest we ever get is a pianissimo down in measure 36. So that's the softest we ever get. But here, measure 25, how soft is too soft? Well, you got a couple of considerations to think about. For one thing, you're playing by yourself. And that's a good thing. That makes it easier because you can set what's loud and what's soft. You're not having to balance with somebody else. You're not having to play inside someone else's sound if you're in an ensemble or a large band or something. You can set it. And generally, sometimes if you've ever heard somebody talk about solo tone or something like that, when we play a solo or something, which is what this is, I mean, you're playing by yourself, we play a little louder. We'll play these dynamic markings, maybe a half a dynamic louder, or maybe even a full dynamic level louder. But we're playing by ourselves, so we want to show off our sound and we play a little louder than we would normally. But above all, we've always got the limits of, we don't want to play so loud that it sounds bad, or so soft that it sounds bad. We can play loud enough that we blow it out of tune, we blow it into a raucous tone quality. We don't want to do that. You can send so much air against the front of your mouth that you blow your chops out of shape and you get a bad tone. At the other end of the scale, you can play so softly that your tone's unsupported and out of tune and fuzzy, and you don't want to do that either. So you want to make sure that whatever you do, your most extreme volumes are still good tones. And if they're not, then you need to pull them in a little bit. Okay? Whether if your soft is not good, you make it a little louder. If your loud is not good, you make it a little softer. Okay? So anyway, here at this MP, we still want to get a good sound. And as we come down to this low F, we want to project all the way through the horn. The low F in measure 26 I'm talking about. Clarinets, if I don't change my air, it's going to get softer. If I play measure 26, I'm going to start at one volume, and I'm going to play the same volume all the way down that measure. So I didn't change anything. I just changed, well, I just played the notes, but I let my air go. And it wasn't a good sound, was it? Because I wasn't projecting all the way through the horn. As you close the horn down, as you add fingers.
Bill?
Yeah?
Oh, is Steve on the phone?
Can you have him call back or take a message?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway. You're going to have to add some air as you go down the horn. Add a little bit of air as you go down. Even though it says soft, we want a good tone. And you do that in measure 26, and you do that in measure 28. Measure 28. We've got to get a good sound, whether it says MP or not. You know, we've got to have a good sound down there, and it has to balance the rest of the musical line that we're playing. Okay? Another thing we do here is, do notice the first few 16th notes in measure 26. You got an E flat followed by a C. You got to play the C over here on the left, right? I hope nobody's trying to slide that. Major no-no, right? Major no-no. The peaks in these phrases. In measure 25 goes up to a high G, which is nice. Measure 27 goes up to an E flat. And that E flat's a little outside the key we're in, that we're used to hearing. That's a color note, color chord. The composer here is playing with the key a little bit. And we want to dwell on, well, not dwell on E flat, but we want to bring that out. We want that E flat there in the third measure of this phrase to sing more. I mean, we want that note to come out, even though we're going fast. You know, we want. We want to make a big deal out of that E flat. We want it to sound pretty. Another thing we can do to make this sound pretty is look in measure 27. The first note, this B flat. I play side B flats a lot, where I finger the A and the second side key from the top, as opposed to the regular B flat with the A and the register key. I don't know if you're hearing it with this microphone, but there's a big difference on my horn, and there might be a big difference on your horn. But you want to do whichever one is clearer and better in tune. So check it with the tuner, and it varies from one model of clarinet to another. So I'm not going to tell you a hard and fast rule, but whenever you've got a long B flat, consider using the side fingering. And I would definitely use it here. At least I would on my horn. Actually, I had an old horn that the difference was really big. My regular B flat wasn't all that good, and I learned to use side B flat a lot, and I just kind of stuck with it. Even though on this horn, the regular B flat isn't too awful bad. But anyway, let's go ahead. This is measure 29. Use side B flats when you can. Slower for you. Let me do it again under tempo. We'll go back to our slow 8th note tempo. This is measure 29 again. What we're shooting for, okay? So let's talk about it. Nothing really new here. And we've got a, in measure 30, we've got a G melodic minor scale going up. That's all that is. If you work with minor scales, that won't be real hard for you, but that's what that is. But let's look at this trill at the end of the line in measure 31. C sharp to a D, C sharp to a D. C sharp is not a great note on the horn, is it? Or on most clarinets. It's not the best sounding note on the instrument. And then we have to trill on it. We're going to trill C to D. And it's kind of hard to do this and make it sound good. And do notice on the grace notes as you come out of the trill, that second grace note's also a C sharp, right? The sharp carries through, so don't play a C natural there. But anyway, here's how you might make this C sharp trill sound better. If you've ever done this thing where you take your hand and lay it flat on a surface, a table or something, and you try and lift one finger at a time, you can do this. You'll find that it kind of works except for your ring finger. It's kind of hard to lift your ring finger by itself. You can lift all your other fingers pretty easily. But that ring finger, not so easily. It works better if you've got a solid surface to lay it on. And that's part of the problem here. We've got to trill with two fingers, the pinky finger and the ring finger. We've got to trill C sharp to D, C sharp to D. And what I do, and you can do this unless your fingers are really small, but I try to move the pinky up right alongside, right up against the ring finger and help the ring finger work. Try and get these fingers fused together so they work as one when they do this trill. Now the ring finger has to seal this hole. You got to seal this hole. So we have to leave this in position, but the pinky finger we can fudge a little bit. All we have to do is catch this C sharp key and it'll work. We don't have to catch it square. We just catch that key a little bit and that key will work for us. And if we fuse these two together, we can make that trill a little cleaner, a little better sounding. Another thing you can do, and the music, the nature of the music helps us here. Nobody wants to really listen to you trill steadily through there for 2 counts. So what we do, we can do a lot of things with a trill. Maybe we hesitate on the note before we actually start the trill. Maybe we start the trill slow and speed it up. You know, we can do things with it. We don't have to just go trill. Do something like that. Start it slow, and that makes it easier to finger when you do that. Kind of gets your fingers warmed up to doing it. But use your imagination a little bit and see if you can make that work for you. But the trick is to make it sound good. Okay. And another thing I haven't really mentioned is another thing you want it to sound to the listener is you want it to sound easy. You know, for a lot of you, this is going to be kind of a hard etude. These are all hard. But we don't want them to sound hard. We don't want the listener or the judge to think we're working hard with this. We want them to think, oh heck, we do this 10 times before breakfast. This is no big deal. This is so easy. We just do this all the time. We want it to sound easy. You're not going to score any points by making it sound like you're struggling. So you want it to sound easy. Okay? Well, let's go on. This is measure 32 at the breath mark. And there's some things in here that are probably going to trip some people up. So let's, again, under tempo at the breath mark in 32 here. To make it easier, the first two measures and the second two measures are almost identical. Almost identical. Differences are around the quarter notes. If you look at the quarter note at measure 35 and the quarter note exactly 2 measures earlier in measure 33, look what happens after those quarter notes. In measure 33, the quarter note comes out to an 8th note. In measure 35, the quarter note comes out to a 16th note. And that trips a lot of people up. But listen to the difference. Just watch your music and just listen here and get a feeling for how it's supposed to sound. I'll do it again. To happen, and I'm using a lot of side B flats in there. I used a side B flat 2 notes before the fermata. The last 2 notes in measure 35, I used a side B flat. I think I used another one somewhere. What was that? I don't remember, but I use it whenever I can. You'll notice I did a retard, and on the printed page there, it doesn't say retard, does it? It doesn't say slow down. But you see the dashes under the last 2 notes in measure 35? That kind of implies we're going to stretch those notes, we're going to slow down. And musically, we can slow down long before those notes. And kind of a rule of thumb is the faster you're going, the earlier you start your retard. If you're not going very fast at all, you'll delay the start of the retard till almost the end of the phrase. But if I start here, the breath mark in measure 34. But I'm coming up to this big fermata, this big stopping point, and I don't want to just come up and stop. I want to gradually put the brakes on. And that's what we're trying to do here. So that was a little under tempo. Let me try this section a little more up to tempo. This is measure 32 at the breath mark. End it musically, end the phrase musically, okay? Now, after that fermata, and this is measure 36, we've got these itty-bitty notes here. And if you've never seen this before, this is sort of a little cadenza. Maybe you have seen this in a solo you did for solo and ensemble. But it's something the player can do at their pleasure. We don't count this out. We don't do this necessarily in an exact rhythm. We just put it in as we feel like it. And if it looks hard, again, let's demystify it here. It's a chromatic scale. You all know your chromatic scale, I assume. That's all it is. The trick here is to know what note it starts on and what note it ends on, so we don't go too far or we get to the end. But everything in between, use your chromatic fingerings for your chromatic F sharps and whatever else is in there that you need to use your chromatic fingerings for. But how we play these notes, we have lots of options here. And I like to do these like this. I like to start slow, and then speed up in the middle of this run, and then slow back down at the end. Now, a lot of people will play it in just one kind of big acceleration, which is fine. That's fine. It's a musical thing. It's your judgment. It's what you want to do. What you want to avoid is doing something that's unmusical. You don't want to go lickety-split through this. It's not going to sound good. It's not going to impress the judges. They're going to hear your technique, your finger wiggling other places in this piece. And they're not going to be impressed one way or the other by how fast you play a chromatic scale if you do it unmusically. So here's some of the ways you might do this little run. This is after the fermata. Notice it starts with a tongue. The first two notes are tongued and pianissimo. That's one way we might do it. Okay? Another way you might do it like this. Where I just did a straight acceleration all the way up. I just like a little retard at the end. Again, kind of like the previous fermata, we're coming down to a stopping place and we slow down for it. I also like to do this too. We're coming up to this high D here. It's kind of like make them wait on it. Make them wait on it. It's like if I go da 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 da. You're waiting for me to finish that. You know, it's just instinctive in our culture, and I'll bet some of you out there finished it as I did it. But we can kind of do this with this little run here. As we come up, make the listener wait. You know, make them wait for you to resolve this run here. And you notice I'm slurring into that high D. It's marked tongue. I'm not sure why that is. If I were editing it, I would slur into it. But if you want to be really picky, I don't know if a judge would shoot you down for this, but I like the idea of slurring it. You can tongue it, okay? Do what's on the page when in doubt. So as if you're being evaluated. If I was just playing this for somebody, I would slur it. But if there's a judge listening to me, I'd probably try and do it literally here. You can also do this, and this is an advanced thing, and I'm not suggesting that everybody do this, but if you're kind of an advanced student and you've been working on this and you're getting it under control and you want to try something extra here, check this out. I don't know how well the microphone picked that up, but I was putting a little bit of a vibrato on it. And vibrato and clarinet don't get along well together, especially when we play with other instruments. But as a soloist, in a solo situation, you can get away with it a little bit, as long as you're tasteful and judicious with it. And again, like any long tone, we don't just vibrato indefinitely, but we vary the vibrato. And that time, I think I sped up and, I don't know, did I slow it down or did I speed it up? I forgot what I did. I just did what felt right. But you can do either way. You can start it slow and speed it up to the end of the note, or you can start it fast and slow it down at the end of the note. But you think like a singer might do it. I guess I sped up, didn't I? But if the tone breaks down on you at the end as you do the vibrato, don't do it. And make sure that as you end the note, you're ending with your embouchure firm, so that you're on pitch and not below the pitch. And I'm not going to turn this into a lesson on how to do vibrato. I'll leave that up to you and another teacher perhaps. But there's a place where you might do it. It's not the easiest note to vibrato on. You got to have your good air going. You cannot vibrato softly on that note very easily. But it's marked forte, so you know, if you feel like you can do it, go for it. That's something you can add. Okay, so that brings us to the A tempo in measure 37 Tempo means back to the original tempo. We've just done our little cadenza, we've had a retard, we've slowed down, but now we got to get back up to tempo. And now what's cool here is this part of the tempo, you already know this. This is just like the beginning for a few measures here. Different. What measure was that? That was measure 41. That's different. That low F natural signals the beginning of the end of the piece. Okay? Now it gets a little different. But it's still very much our sextuplets. We know these by now. We're comfortable with them. We're just continuing on. So here's measure 41. Let's go back under tempo here because we got some new things coming up. Under tempo, measure 41. Little diminuendo there. And then we're going to be right back up to a forte at 45. But up to tempo, I don't know, there's nothing really new there, just you have to work it out and practice it. That's kind of what you're shooting for there. Again, 45, we've kind of seen this before. Here. That was the end of the sextuplets, by the way. They're 45 and 46. Those are the last two. You might hear some people, and you probably hear me doing this. It becomes kind of an unconscious thing. As we do this musically, we do a little with those sextuplets. We hold the first note a little longer, and then we speed through the rest of them, through the other 5. I cannot tell you how to count that. It's something you just feel. But I'll go back to the tempo, and I'll do these. This will take me through maybe 6 or 7 sextuplets, and I'll try and do it on each one, and maybe you'll hear what I'm talking about. And you only really notice it when you're at tempo. But you'll hear advanced players do this a little bit. Crescendoing as I go through the sextuplet sometimes. So, you know, that's another thing you can do with these things as you get comfortable with them. Just make it a little more interesting musically. Okay? So let's look here, measure 49. We got a trill here on the F sharp. Not a hard trill, it's an easy trill. But start it slow. Let the F sharp sound before you start the trill. So let's get into it a little better than that. I'm going to go back one measure. This is measure 47. And I'm not sure what to do with that breath mark in measure 48. I'm not sure if you really need a breath there. I'm not sure if the editor just wants you to separate those two half notes. Could be. I am kind of ignoring it. I'm just playing through there. Maybe you might sit down with another teacher and see what they think, but I've got no opinion about what's supposed to happen with that breath mark. If nothing extra happens there, that's fine with me. Okay. I would just play through it. Just make sure you don't slur into the trill or something weird like that, I guess. But okay, anyway, this is measure 49 now. We got a new idea here as we come down to the end. Actually, we could almost kind of end this thing right there with that trill and the note that the trill comes out on. But we've got kind of a tag or a little coda here. And I'm going to play this under tempo. if you picked that up, but you can see it on the page there. You've got, I played 4 measures, and the first 2 measures and the second 2 measures are exactly the same. Let's talk about the articulation. A lot of T, tap, tap, T, tap, tap. Remember what I talked about before? The last note of the slur gets a dot. It's got to be short. But look at measure 50. We got something different here. We haven't seen this. We got 3 slurred and 1 tongue. 3 slurred and 1 tongue. T, tap, T, tap, T, tap, T, And the way we write music is a little misleading here, because we beam 4 notes together. If you look at measure 50, we got groups of 4/16ths all together. But the reality is that musically, that 4th 16th note really belongs with the next group, belongs with the group after it. It's like a pickup to the next group, okay? And I'm going to start at measure 50. I'm going to go slow, and you'll hear that. You'll hear that. You'll hear that the 4th note of each group is actually a pickup to the next group. And it's set up by the last note of the slur being played short. T-ah, tap, T-ah, tap, T-ah. And of course you do it again 2 bars later, okay? And then at tempo, it may or may not be obvious. It depends. You want to try and make it obvious. It's kind of a funny thing in music. There's a lot of things we do as players. Maybe it's a dynamic change. Quite often it is a dynamic change. We know we're making a dynamic change. We hear ourselves doing a dynamic change. We see the dynamics on the page. We're doing it. We're using more air. We're making something happen. But you got to keep asking yourself, is it obvious to the listener that I'm doing it? And that's kind of what we want to do here. I'm talking about making this little 16th note into a pickup. Is it going to be obvious to the person listening that I'm doing it? You know, I know I'm doing it, but do they know I'm doing it? So we want it to be obvious to them. So maybe to us, we exaggerate it. To me, maybe it sounds like I'm exaggerating it. And we do this with dynamics a lot. We got to make sure that it's really obvious to us that we're doing it, so it's obvious to the listener. The listener doesn't see our music. The listener doesn't see what we're trying to do, or, well, the judge does, but they don't know what we're really trying to do. So we have to communicate that by how we play. So we exaggerate. Dancers understand this. They exaggerate, they stretch, they extend to show the viewer what they're doing. We have to do the same thing with somebody's ears. We have to make it obvious. Up to tempo. And I hope you heard the pickups. I felt like I was doing them, but I hope they come off on the video here. But that's what you want to shoot for there. And then the last thing, we end this big run, just a G scale. And we've got a nice crescendo on it. And that's Etude number 35. I'm kind of looking back at it here to see if I overlooked anything. I hope this helps. Probably by the time this shows up on the web somewhere, I've made this for some of my students, but eventually it'll get on the web, I'm sure. There's probably going to be some other videos of people doing this. You can look at those too. I don't know if anybody will actually discuss it like this, but I hope this helps you. Use this. If you want to leave a comment, I don't know if I'll get to respond or get to see them or ask. You know, if you want to ask a question, I'll try to respond. I don't know that I'll get others done, but do keep in mind that, you know, we're dwelling on this one etude, but you got 2 others you got to learn too. And the truth is, probably the hardest one is the slow one, the one with the 5 sharps in it, number 29. In the end, that one might be the one that gives you the most trouble of all. But when you first look at it, this one can be kind of intimidating to look at. So I just wanted to demystify it, and I hope I've done that. I hope this helps you all. So y'all have fun with this. It is a fun etude. We're kind of lucky this year. Some years we haven't always had as good a music to work with as these. But get the Hite book, get the yellow book, and get practicing, okay? Have a good one.